शक्नोति इह एव यः शोढुं शक्नोति एव यः शोढुं प्राक् शरीर विमोक्षणात् प्राक् शरीर विमोक्षणात् काम क्रोध उद्भवं वेगं काम क्रोधोद्भवं वेगं सह युक्तः सह सुखी नरः स युक्तः स सुखी नरः शक्नोति एव यः शोढुं प्राक् शरीर विमोक्षणात् काम क्रोध उद्भवं वेगं स युक्तः स सुखी नरः शक्नोति एव स शोढुं प्राक् शरीर विमोक्षणात् काम क्रोधोद्भवं वेगं स युक्तः स सुखी नरः शक्नोति एव य शोढुं प्राक् शरीर विमोक्षणात् काम क्रोधोद्भवं वेगं स युक्तः सुखी नरः शक्नोति एव य शोढुं प्राक् शरीर विमोक्षणात् काम क्रोधोद्भवं वेगं स युक्तः स सुखी नरः शक्नोति एव य शोढुं प्राक् शरीर विमोक्षणात् काम क्रोधोद्भवं वेगं स युक्तः स सुखी नरः. Beautiful verse in continuation from the last verse that we had, which is also equally beautiful. That is, yehi samsparshaja bhoga dukkha yonaya evate adi antavantah kaunteya nateshu ramate buddha. So this verse, which is one of the most important verses, is mentioning about what an intelligent person does and what he does not do. So basically, he does not take part in sources of misery, which are due to contact with material senses. Such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. So what does a man of intelligence do? He recognizes that the happiness that is derived from senses is temporary, and it is actually a source of misery. And therefore, a man of intelligence, he recognizes, I am not supposed to engage or try to derive pleasure out of these senses in a material way. So now this verse is saying what not to do. And in today's verse, it is further explaining as what furthermore one should do. So one is that one should not try to engage in one's own senses and try to seek pleasure out of them, which are both temporary and which are both the sources of misery. But rather, here, there are a few more things that a person is supposed to do if he wants to become truly happy. If he wants to really become a yogi, this verse is telling what one should do. So, interestingly, it's being said here, Prak Sharira Vimokshanat. So, Prak is referring to before, Vimokshanat, before giving up this body. So, before giving up Sharira, this body. So, it is very important to recognize that the Lord Krishna is instructing Arjuna what one must do. And that must be done not at some later point of time. Right now, in this life, one must do something. And what is that? Shaknoti heva ya shodum. So, shodum means to tolerate. As we see, Lord Krishna, even in 2nd chapter, he explains the importance of tolerance. Matra sparshastu kaunteya shitoshna sadukhada agamana payano anityas tam satikshva bharata. So this principle of tolerance is very, very important for a yogi, for a person who wants to progress in spiritual life. This so-called happiness and distress which may come on its own accord, one must be able to tolerate them. So shaknoti iheva yaha shodum. So this ability to tolerate is a very, very important principle for someone who wants to be happy or who's trying to become a yogi, or who is a yogi. He must demonstrate this quality of being able to tolerate the ups and downs. And it is further being said, what else a person who is trying to become a yogi or who is happy in this world, what does he do? So kama krodhodbhavam vegam. So this urges he is able to tolerate. So what is he able to tolerate? He is able to tolerate those urges that are emanating from desire and anger, those urges which are coming from material senses. So this principle of being ability to have the ability to tolerate the urges of these material senses and the forces of desire and anger is an essential characteristic for anyone who wants to be a Sukhi Naraha. If one wants to be really happy, one must learn this art of controlling or checking the forces of desire, anger, and the urges of material senses. So let us go further, try to understand what this verses are trying to, what this purport and the verse is trying to say even further. So this word prak sharira vimokshanat is a very beautiful word. So before giving up this body, so usually there is a tendency to delay things, to postpone spiritual things. But here again, Lord Krishna is emphasizing that in this life, in this very life, before one gives up the body, one must take to this process of tolerance. Why is that so important? In different places in Vedic scriptures, the importance of human life is being mentioned. Because in this life, if one does not take to Krishna consciousness, if one does not practice the process of becoming a yogi or becoming a self-realized person, there are so many problems. So as we see, this transmigration, one can go either to the higher planetary system, one can remain in the same planetary system, or one can even go to a lower kind of species or lower planetary systems. So as we see in Bhagavad Gita, it is mentioned, at the time of death, whatever we think, and accordingly we get the body. If we are in the mode of goodness, we go to higher planetary systems. If we are in the mode of passion, then we remain in this earthly planet. And if we are filled with the mode of ignorance, then we go to the lower species or lower planetary systems. So this human form is such a rare opportunity. It's such an important opportunity, which the Vedic scriptures time and again tell that this human form of life is so important because there is a loophole from this transmigration of repeated birth and death. There is a chance that the living entity can escape from this repeated miseries, from this repeated samsara cycle. So therefore, again and again, this importance of this human life is being mentioned in different places. Let us try to look at one place. This is in 4th chapter, 29th chapter, which is a discussion between sage Narada and King Prachina Bari. So there are wonderful instructions given by sage Narada to King Prachina Bari. And this is, I think, verse number 53. So here, in this verse, it is being said, "My dear king, please search out that deer who is engaged in eating grass in a very nice flower garden along with his wife. That deer is very much attached to his business and is enjoying the sweet singing of the bumblebees in his garden. Just try to understand his position. He is unaware that before him is a tiger, which is accustomed to living at the cost of another's flesh. Behind the deer is a hunter who is threatening to pierce him with sharp arrows. Thus, the deer's death is imminent." So, Sage Narada, when he's giving instructions to King Prachinabari, he's giving different allegories to explain the importance of human life. And here he's giving another allegory to explain the importance of human life. And here he's comparing actually a human to a deer, where he's saying, what is this deer is doing? It is very peacefully eating grass along with his wife. So is that wrong? Is it wrong for a person to just eat and just be happy with his family and wife? Is that wrong? But there is something more to this. So let us see. So as we see, people may also say, what is wrong in having a nice house, nice family, nice comfortable life with relatives and so on and so forth? So here the deer is doing something very similar. He's enjoying the sweet singing of the bumblebees in his garden and is attached to his business of eating nicely. So this is what everyone is trying to do in this world, to find a comfortable place, make it arranged in a nice way with his family and try to enjoy. But here is the important point. Just try to understand his position. So Sri Narada is telling, that's not all it is. That's what it is saying. The deer is saying only that much of it. That I'm eating and I'm happy with my wife and I'm getting some grass to eat in this garden. But there is something which the deer is not aware, but someone like Sage Narada, he's aware and he's telling what else is happening there. He's unaware that before him is a tiger. So very close to that deer is a tiger, which is going to eat flesh, which is going to kill another living entity, especially an animal like deer, and make it has this food. So similarly, there is another person who is behind the deer. Who is that? There is a hunter who is threatening to pierce him with sharp arrows. So thus the deer's death is imminent. So just like Prabhupada also gives this another example of a goat in a sheep or a goat in a slaughterhouse, which is about to be killed, but it's unaware of its position. Whereas if it's a human being who is present, who is going to get into the slaughterhouse and is going to be killed, immediately finds a way. Is there a way? Can I come out? Is there a way? Why am I being put into this place? What is that is happening to me? What can I do? Whereas an ignorant animal like a deer is not really aware of its imminent death. Similarly, we can be also ignorant of the imminent death that is coming. So there's a beautiful purport to this, which Srila Prabhupada explains very nice points. So Prabhupada says, here is an allegory in which the king is advised to find a deer that is always in a dangerous position. Although threatened from all sides, the deer simply eats grass in a nice flower garden, unaware of the danger all around him. All living entities, especially human beings, think themselves very happy in the midst of families, as if living in a flower garden and hearing the sweet humming of bumblebees. Everyone is centered around his wife, who is the beauty of family life. The bumblebees humming may be compared to the talk of children. The human being, just like the deer, enjoys his family without knowing that before him is the factor of time, which is represented by the tiger. The fruitive activities of a living entity simply create another dangerous position and oblige him to accept different types of bodies. For a deer to run after a mirage of water in the desert is not unusual. The deer is also very fond of sex. The conclusion is that one who lives like a deer will be killed in due course of time. Vedic literatures therefore advise that we should understand our constitutional position and take to devotional service before death comes. According to Bhagavatam 11.9.29, Labdhva sudharlabam idam bahu sambhavante manushyam arthadam anityam apiha dhiraha turnam yatetana patet anumrityu yavan nishreyasa saya vishayah khalu sarvatah syat. After many births, we have attained this human form. Therefore, before death comes, we should engage ourselves in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. That is the fulfillment of human life. So this present life is so precious. So across Vedic scriptures, again and again, this point is being emphasized, that how important is this human form of life. So here, Prabhupada in the purport is beautifully explaining that one should not be like a deer. And Prabhupada is comparing, just like the deer, one can think of being centered around a wife in the family, and the talks of the children like the bumblebees humming. So just like the deer is enjoying, a person also ignorant can also enjoy these things without knowing that before him is a factor of time, which is like the tiger, which is going to capture the living entity and take away everything that he's possessing. Similarly, it is being said that in due course of time, one will not exist in the same form one is. But if one is not aware of this, and if one is not aware of one's constitutional position, then he is no different than an animal. So here, Srimad Bhagavatam is saying, Labdva sudurlabam idam bahu sambhavante. So after many, many lifetimes, bahu sambhavante. So after many, many lifetimes, one gets this opportunity of human body where one has an elevated consciousness. And in this life, one can make arthadam. It is actually that one can make the real benefit, what is required for human form of life to perfect. So that opportunity is present here. And if one does not utilize that, then one again gets into another cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease, either in one form of species or another form of species. And that is very, very troublesome. And therefore, this prak sharira vimokshanat. So in this very life, before giving up this body, one must endeavor to do some things. And what is that? Shaknoti ihaiva yaha shodum. So one must learn to tolerate in this very life. Now let us see what is the need to control our material senses. Prabhupada is very beautifully is explaining in this beginning of the purport as why there is a need to control the material senses. Prabhupada is saying, if one wants to make steady progress on the path of self-realization, he must try to control the forces of the material senses. So it is very important to recognize, as we were saying in today's morning class also, there is this word abhidaya. The word abhidaya means activities which are performed to satisfy the Supreme Lord. So in the normal conditioned life, the living entity is trying to satisfy one's own senses, is trying to love oneself, is trying to satisfy oneself independently by engaging material senses with material sense objects. Whereas, so on the other hand, if one wants spiritual realization, now by doing these activities of material senses, satisfying material senses, what happens is that one forgets this goal of life of self-realization. One cannot really understand what self-realization is. And on the other hand, only one who can engage the senses in satisfying the Supreme Lord, in controlling them from unwanted engagements, only that person can advance in spiritual life. As we also see in Bhagavad Gita, Bhoga Aishwarya Prasaktanam. So if one is too much involved, engaged in Bhoga and Aishwarya, in too much of sense enjoyment, his intelligence cannot be steady. In fact, not only intelligence is not steady, it gets bewildered to so many other things and cannot find a means to actually perfect life. And this is also said by Prahlad Maharaj. He also says that Matirna Krishna Parato Swatova Mito Abhipadyeta Grihavritanam Adhanta Gobhir Vishatam Tamishram Punash Charvita Charvananam. Because of their uncontrolled senses, persons too addicted to materialistic life make progress towards hellish conditions and repeatedly chew that which has already been chewed. Their inclinations toward Krishna are never aroused, either by the instructions of others, by their own efforts, or by a combination of both. So here, Prahlad Maharaj is telling Hiranyakashipu that because of the uncontrolled senses, if one is too addicted to enjoying senses, women, wine, wealth, then for them, the path is towards hellish conditions of life. Because they are just repeatedly chewing the chewed, punash charvita charvananam. So one who is too much engrossed in sense gratification, he cannot think of the higher concepts of life, the goal of life, attaining Krishna, serving Krishna. Those things does not come. How? Neither by the instructions of others, neither by their efforts, or a combination of both of them. So one of the most important detrimental factor in one's progress of spiritual life is how one is engaging one's senses. And if one is engaging one's senses only to satisfy oneself, and the person is too much worried about those things only, then the spiritual progress is very, very slow. On the other hand, one who learns this art of how to engage one's senses and mind in the rightful way, he makes very, very rapid advancement in spiritual life. So these verses, a series of verses, are so important, and they are giving very nice instructions for us to understand as how we can make rapid progress in our spiritual life. There are many other verses which tell the importance of controlling senses, and even in fact, in the verse that I read, where Sage Narada is instructing King Prachinabari in the 4th canto, 29th chapter, there are so many instructions given by Sage Narada as why it is so important to control material senses. If not, what happens? It's very wonderfully described by Sage Narada and beautiful purpose by Srila Prabhupada. And let us look at a few more aspects. Prabhupada also tells a beautiful analogy as what is the need to control the urges. So one may think that I can do what I like to do. Why are you stopping me from doing what I'm liking to do? So there's a normal tendency in people to not follow something or to have the freedom to do what they like to do. So Prabhupada gives us a beautiful analogy of a patient and a doctor. So Prabhupada says that a patient may like to eat some food stuff, let's say some solid food stuff. But the doctor, recognizing the condition of the patient, may tell that this is not actually good for you because this is not going to cure you. You're only supposed to be on liquid diet. But if one is so adamant that just, no, I want to eat only solid food which I like, the solid food that which I like, then Prabhupada says one does not get cured of the disease. And therefore, when one is not cured of the disease, can he really be happy? What kind of happiness can he derive eating a solid food in a disease condition? He may be happy for a moment that he got the food that he likes, but can he be really happy? Because the problem of the disease will come again. It has not gone away, so it still is existing there. And therefore, it is going to cause him more pain. So therefore, this tendency to enjoy the senses, Prabhupada says, is very similar to this analogy of trying to become happy in a diseased condition of life. Prabhupada says that in a diseased condition of life, even though one may be trying to enjoy, he cannot actually really enjoy. Similarly, Prabhupada says that if one wants to really enjoy, one cannot enjoy in this material world because it is a diseased condition of life. Only when one moves to the spiritual world, when one is fixed in spiritual position, that's when one is actually enjoying real happiness. Until then, there is no real happiness. It's just an illusion that one is thinking for a moment there is some happiness that is deriving out of enjoying his senses, but it is not the real happiness. And therefore, the condition of a person who is not willing to follow the instructions of the Shastras, who is not willing to follow the instructions of Acharyas, they are just simply trying to prolong their diseased condition of life. And Prabhupada is saying, what is a cure? One can be cured by following the prescription of the Lord, of the Acharyas. So one of the important instructions that Lord Krishna is giving here is who can become happy? That person can become happy who can check the urges and forces of kama and krodha, who can check the urges of material senses. And for that reason, Acharyas have given us various teachings, various instructions as how we can check these forces. And here, Prabhupada gives in one lecture, in fact, a lecture for this verse itself, to be situated in the transcendental position of Krishna consciousness, that is the cure. So Prabhupada says that unless one doesn't come to this position of being situated in the transcendental position of complete Krishna consciousness, one cannot be cured. And one of the major reasons that is preventing us from becoming Krishna consciousness is one's engagement in uncontrolled sense enjoyment. in still having faith in the taste that there is happiness in material world, in material senses, and their contact with sense objects. As long as one is having that understanding, one is not able to situate oneself in pure Krishna consciousness. And as long as one is not situated, one has to undergo the tribulations of the material existence. And therefore, Prabhupada is giving us this cure that one has to become situated in this transcendental position. So let us try to analyze a little more carefully as what are the different urges and how one can overcome those urges or check the forces of those urges. So here is the instruction by Srila Rupa Goswami, who in the Nectar of Instruction, verse 1 beautifully explains the different kinds of urges, and Prabhupada gives a wonderful purport to explain how one can handle those different kinds of urges. So here it's been said, Vacho vegam manasa krodha vegam, jivva vegam udara upastha vegam, etan vegan yo vishaheta dhiraha, sarvam apimam prithvim shashishyat. So there are different 6 kinds of urges that are being referred to here by Srila Rupa Goswami. And it is being said, a person who is dhiraha, who is sober, vishaheta, he can tolerate. Not everyone can tolerate. Only someone who is dhiraha, who is sober, who is intelligent enough, can tolerate. What are the 6 kinds of urges? Vacho vegam. So the urge to speak is the first kind of urge. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj also says this bodily concept of life, the tendency to speak is so much. And the tendency to speak what? Speak the mundane material affairs. This is happening here, that person is like that, some sort of unwanted gossip or some kinds of frivolous jokes, frivolous topics. So this is a common topic that people want to speak because that is the nature of one who's in bodily concept of life. And there's another class of people who try to prevent this speech, this tendency of speaking, by completely remaining quiet, mauni, trying to become completely away from speaking even a single word. But actually, that's not the right way to actually control this urge of speech. We will see in the few slides further as how one should learn how to control one's tendency to speak. Then similarly, there is this vega of mind. The mind, it travels at such a huge speed. So as we see in Brahma Samhita, it says, even if one travels at the speed of mind for many, many thousands of years, one still cannot reach Krishna. So Krishna is very far, but our mind is always wandering in different material things. It's not even trying to understand Krishna, although it cannot really capture just by material efforts. But our mind is wandering so many different things. What is happening in India? What is happening there? What is happening here? What is happening to my family members? So many things. So the mind is constantly wavering to different things. How can mind remain fixed so that it is not moving here and there? What is to be done? How it is to be controlled? That is also very beautifully mentioned by Srila Rupa Goswami. Furthermore, anger. As soon as something that does not satisfy one, as soon as one's expectations are mismatched, there is immediate sense of anger. And as we also see in Bhagavad Gita, as it is mentioned, Sangat sanjayate kamaha, kamam krodho abhijayate, samohat smriti vibramaha, smriti brahmashad, buddhi nashat pranashyati. So we can see here as how contemplating on the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment, and from such attachment, lust develops, and from lust, anger arises. So as soon as one is trying to enjoy one's senses and someone is preventing some check, oh, you cannot do this, then as soon as there is some prevention of one's enjoyment, there is immediately anger. And then jiva vegam, tongue, as we see Bhaktivinoda Thakur says, is the most difficult to control. there is an immediate urge to taste something which is tasty. And then the urges of Udara Upastha, the belly, it wants to eat more and more, wants to fill itself more and more. And genitals, the urge of sex, is so predominant in the conditioned living entities. So these are different urges that the living entity is bound by. And these urges are pulling one back to the material conditioned living. And similarly, there are the urges of the sight, the different senses have different sense objects, and the different senses are being pulled. A beautiful form, there is an attraction, there is a hope that is the thing that is going to give me happiness. There's different kinds of music, different kinds of talks people want to hear, hoping that will going to give them relief and enjoyment, different kinds of touch. So in this way, the living entity is being entrapped in this conditioned living by hoping or trying to fulfill these urges that are coming out. In fact, a yogi, Prabhupada defines in different places, is one who can control one's senses and mind. That is the preliminary qualification of a yogi. And especially for one who is trying to become Krishna conscious, one who is trying to become the highest yogi, yoginam api sarvesham, one who is trying to remember Krishna always. So for them, also these principles equally are important. Not only for one yogi who is just trying to, Prabhupada says there are different kinds of yogis. Some in the winter, they go into the water and they cover up to neck with cold water and they sit there. Or in summer, they put fire around themselves and sit in between and tolerate the different kinds of vegas or the urges. So Prabhupada says that is not the method that is recommended for us. We have a very simple process to control the urges and deal with different kinds of urges and make progress in spiritual life. So let us look at some of the solutions that Srila Rupa Goswami gives, how to handle these different kinds of urges. The first urge is urge to speak. And Prabhupada also writes in the purport there that it's like a frog or a toad which is making sounds. As a toad is making sound, it is only letting the snake know as where it should come and eat. So similarly, unwanted speech is compared like that. That is that we are inviting death. And we cannot stop to speak artificially. We need a bona fide process which can actually help us to stop this tendency or the urge of speech. And the method that is recommended is one can control the urge to speak by speaking Krishna Katha, by engaging ourselves in discussing about Lord Krishna, glorifying Lord Krishna. This is the way to control the speech. So just like we see here, King Parishit Maharaj is hearing from Sukadeva Goswami. So this transcendental narrations is all purifying. And this our tendency to speak is completely purified when we speak only about Krishna. As we see, when Sutta Goswami is explaining to the sages of Naimisaranya, he immediately thanks them for asking wonderful questions, because those questions were all pertaining to Lord Krishna. And therefore, he was so happy to speak about Lord Krishna. Similarly, we will see that Sukadeva Goswami was extremely happy by hearing the questions of Parishit Maharaj, because he was only asking to speak about Krishna. He was doing various inquiries about Krishna and his devotees. So similarly, if we also engage our tongue in understanding, asking rightful questions about Krishna, trying to inquire more about Krishna and his devotees, and then after hearing, to speak about them. If one simply does this one thing, then the tendency to speak immediately, the urge to speak unwanted things can easily get vanquished. So this is a very nice and simple, but yet very interesting, very nice principle that we can adopt to control the urge to speak. Then there are mind's demands. The mind is always running, thinking about how can I take care of myself? How can I take care of other people? How can I take care of my work, my so many responsibilities? So the mind has this tendency to go to different places, and it is usually caught up in this three modes of material nature, in this temporary phenomenal world, that it cannot really experience or understand the transcendence. It cannot really go beyond what is beyond mundane. And therefore, it requires a very, very powerful tool. So Srila Prabhupada talks about chanting Hare Krishna as one of the most important method to control mind. In fact, the easiest method to control mind in Kali Yuga. There are different kinds of methods that are employed to control mind, but chanting is the easiest way. And as one goes on chanting, one can also eventually remember the lotus feet of Lord Shri Krishna. So as soon as Prabhupada says, as soon as there is fire, as soon as there is sun, there is no darkness. So Prabhupada says, somewhere or other in your mind, if you keep Krishna, then everything else will vanquish. The lust will vanquish, the different urges of the mind and the body will vanquish. So somewhere or other, we have to bring Krishna. And as soon as we bring Krishna, as soon as we remember the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, then all the inauspicious things, all the miseries of life can immediately vanquish. And therefore, chanting and remembering the lotus feet of Lord Krishna is the easiest way to handle one's mind's demands, which are always troubling us with different desires and goals and anxieties and so on and so forth. Then the anger is also very common, especially when we have people whom we can be easily angry upon, like bosses in the company or faculties, professors. As soon as they get an opportunity, they can become angry. So anger is employed for different reasons, sometimes for personal reasons, sometimes for economical reasons, sometimes for organizational reasons. There are different reasons for being angry. But if one really wants to check the unwanted anger that's coming, the best way to apply that or handle anger is to apply on those who blaspheme the Lord or his devotees. So if one wants to really employ one's anger, one should apply it where, how can I preach more the glories of the Lord? How can I be angry on those who are troubling devotees or blaspheming the Lord or his devotees? And the wonderful example is that of Hanuman, who employed the tendency of being angry in burning Lanka. Similarly, the devotees of Lord, they are always angry whenever there is some sort of blasphemy or some sort of trouble created to the Lord or to the devotees, and thereby they can check the forces of unwanted anger. Next, there is tongue and belly. As we see, tongue being the most voracious of all the senses is very difficult to control, and so is the belly, which are all directly connected. Prabhupada says they all fall in the straight line. So unless one does not control the tongue, one cannot control the other senses, and therefore it's a must in Krishna consciousness that we control the urges of tongue and the belly. And the wonderful instruction that is given is that Krishna prasadam at scheduled times. So to eat only Krishna prasadam, Prabhupada again and again in different places mentions that if one simply takes Krishna prasadam and engages one's tongue in chanting, one can go back to home, back to Godhead. So the simple process, although it may seem very simple, but strictly follow this. To eat only Krishna prasadam and at scheduled times. If one can just simply do this, then this unwanted urges of tongue and belly to satisfy in different places will vanquish. And we are so merciful that by Srila Prabhupada and his devotees, we have wonderful Krishna prasadam arranged. So if we simply adhere to this principle, then by Lord's arrangement, in different circumstances, we still find prasadam, not just prasadam, but opulent, beautiful, tasty prasadam that comes by the mercy of Prabhupada and Krishna. So we must take this another important principle, that we always take Krishna prasadam. And simply by doing this, we can easily control the urges of tongue and belly. And similarly, for the urges of genitals, Prabhupada says one should employ genitals only for procreation and for no other reason. So in this way, if one is able to follow the instructions given by Acharyas, Srila Prabhupada, and follow these instructions of how to handle our different urges. If we strictly follow these principles, then we very soon, very easily can overcome the unwanted urges, which are all checking us from further progress in spiritual life. So gravity is one another important thing. So speaking frivolously is one thing. The opposite of that is gravity. To speak when required, the appropriate thing. So that is also one of the qualities of Lord Krishna. He's very grave. It's very difficult to understand how, whether he's angry, he's sad, he's happy, unhappy. It's very difficult to understand because he's always equanimous. He's always composed. So similarly, devotees must be composed, must be working to control these urges. And Prabhupada has given us these different instructions and different methods by which we can easily control the different urges. So in short, here is a short summary of that we discussed. In order to control the urges of speaking, one should take to Krishna Katha, read, discuss, and speak the glories of Lord Krishna. In that way, one can control the urges to speak. The urges of mind, one must chant the holy names of the Lord and remember the lotus feet of the Lord. In that way, one can control the mind's wavering demands. Then to control anger, one must apply that anger on those who blaspheme the devotees of the Lord. And as far as Krishna, tongue and belly are concerned, one must take Krishna Prasadam at scheduled times. And to control the urges of genitals, one must use only for procreation. When one can follow these principles, then one can easily control these urges. And Prabhupada says that he is a yogi who can control, who can tolerate these urges. One who is not able to control these urges, Prabhupada says he's not even worthy to be compared as a human being. Because human being means ability to have this self-control, to be responsible. So that's all the Vedic training is all about. So as we see here, in Vedic civilization, training was given in all the ashramas, brahmacharya. So as soon as one is very young, one is trained as how not to give in to these different urges, how one should restrain oneself in different circumstances. And how is that restraint possible? That restraint is possible when he is engaged in Athato Brahma Jignasa, when he is engaged in learning about the absolute truth. So Prabhupada says, unless there is search for the absolute truth, if one is not making enough inquiry about absolute truth, if one is not making enough inquiries to understand Krishna, then one will be engaged in different kinds of sense gratificatory activities. But as soon as one is engaged in activities of finding out, searching out, researching the absolute truth, and engaging in the service of the absolute truth, then automatically the tendencies of gratifying one's own senses get vanquished. So this is very important principle that everyone must be trained to how to inquire about the supreme absolute truth, how to understand supreme absolute truth, and how to engage in the service of the supreme absolute truth, Sri Krishna. By doing this, one can easily handle the different urges. And Prabhupada mentions in different places that how a brahmachari would not associate with any woman. And only if, even if the wife of a guru, only if she is old, he's supposed to engage, do some service when the wife of the acharya or guru asks the disciple to do. Otherwise, if the wife of a guru is young, then even a disciple, a brahmachari, is not supposed to engage in service or even associate. So the strict principles of Varnashrama Dharma, they're all meant to help one to learn how to control the urges. And in Grihastha Ashrama, where there is tendency of forgetfulling this importance of controlling urges. And therefore, there are various instructions which are given as how one should lead in a Grihastha Ashrama. Ashrama means the bottom line is how to progress in spiritual life. So if there is no concept of spiritual progress in Grihastha life, then it is very difficult to control the urges. Someone wants to buy, someone wants to, so the distinction between wants and needs get vanquished. Need means what is absolutely necessary. But want means, I want big sofa, I want big car, I want that, so many wants. So wife wants something, husband wants something, children want something. So in this unwanted wants, one gets lost and there is no end to this wants. So unless there is no proper training in the previous ashrama, or at least by mercy of Prabhupada, we have various instructions, various the simple process of chanting Hare Krishna and associating with temple, rendering service in the temple, if you do not engage in these activities, then it is very, very difficult to control these urges. And if one is not able to control urges, then the life becomes very much entangled very soon. And then it is not possible to become happy and forget becoming a yogi. And Prabhupada further says that in Vanaprastha also there is complete abstinence of sex, and so is in sannyasa, and so is in brahmacharya. So that practice of being refraining from this great urge of sex, the different kinds of urges, is not possible if one is not trained. Therefore, this process of undergoing training, and by mercy of Prabhupada has established various institutions, various temples, so that these are the places where we can get trained in how do we control these urges. How do we focus ourselves on identifying, on researching, on finding out the absolute truth, and finding out what are our needs, what are our wants. Because that distinction between need and want, if that doesn't happen, then we are always entangled in the wants. And it's very difficult to satisfy one's wants, because one who is not trained spiritually, bahushakahi anantasya. So just like the intelligence is diversified, similarly the wants become one to another, to another, to another. As someone was telling, they're looking after iPhone 13 day after day, day after day. They may have iPhone 12, iPhone 11, but still they want one more thing. So this idea of want cannot go away. This unwanted material desires cannot go away until one is trained. And therefore, this opportunity, Lord Krishna is telling, in this own life, one must tolerate these urges. Otherwise, one cannot be happy, neither can one can become happy. One can become a yogi. And Prabhupada is saying, on the other hand, one who can do this is to be understood to be a self-realized and is thus happy in the state of self-realization. So if one wants to become really happy, if one wants to really attain the goal of life and come to the state of not being in a diseased condition, but rather in a healthy condition, Prabhupada says healthy condition means life of eternity and bliss. Uninterrupted, Brahma Saukyam to Anantam. So one is considered to be in healthy state when one is experiencing Brahma Saukyam to Anantam. One is experiencing endless happiness, not temporary happiness. And that is possible when one is in the state of self-realized and is able to handle or tolerate these urges. It is the duty of the Transcendentalist to try strenuously control desire and anger. So we must always try to check these different forces of desire and anger that arises in us, to carefully check. As Kunti Maharani says, avidya kama karma vihi. So because of ignorance, the different kinds of desires come into us and we work towards them. So the first step is to get knowledge, is to associate with sadhus, associate with Prabhupada's books. In this way, when we associate, then we get the knowledge as what should we desire, what is the need that we have, what is the goal of life. Then we will transform our desires. When we transform our desires, our activities become different. Our ability to tolerate these urges become easier. And then one can find a happy life. So this is another nice verse, which is telling us that we should all try to control our forces of anger and desire and check the material senses, and thereby become a yogi and live happily in this world. I'll stop here and see if there are any comments or questions.
Ask one question to each of them.
Palini Mataji, would you like to share something about how to control urges?
You spoke about the six urges as mentioned in Nectar of Instruction, verse 1, and you mentioned you had you spoke about how to control each of them. You can control speech by speaking about Krishna Katha. Mind's demand.
One is enough. Okay, one is. Ankit Prabhu?
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Yeah.
What is the verse trying to say?
Yeah, we should engage in Krishna consciousness and if we follow everything perfectly, so and in that way we will be able to control our senses. So before we leave this body, we have to control, in this life only, our senses and all.
What happens if one controls one's senses?
If we control our senses, then we will be engaged in Krishna consciousness, and there will be no anger, no anxiety. We will be free from all these.
Basically, this verse is saying in this very life, before the ending this body, if one can tolerate the urges of material senses and the forces of anger and desire, then one can lead a happy life in this world and also can be a yogi. So that is what primarily this verse is saying. So it's always good for us to become more and more specific, because Krishna consciousness, we can say so many things which are very generic. But as much as possible, we should try to stick to what the verse is saying and what is discussed today. Srinidhi Priya Mataji.
Yes, Prabhu.
What is the significance of human life? What example was given?
Sorry about the background, Prabhu. So it is about self-realization and going back home to Godhead.
Okay. Anyone remembers the example that was given? Shreya Prabhu or Jagannath?
Doctor and patient.
No. Wait, let me ask Shreya Prabhu and Jagannath Prabhu.
Sorry, what's the question, Prabhu?
What example was given to explain the importance of human life?
Prabhu, the example of deer enjoying in the forest with the wife, not knowing there is a tiger in front waiting to eat, and there is this hunter who's behind trying to pierce him and kill him. So similarly, human body, there is this kala or time that's running, that's gonna eventually end the human form of life.
Yes. So yes, that's Srinidhi Mataji. What was the example of the patient and doctor? Do you remember anything?
Sorry, Prabhu, I was trying to unmute myself. The example was it is to control the urges again. So a patient can, or when doctor says, tells to patient that they cannot have some kind of a food, they still want to take it, or if they feel the urge to consume that food, again they will end up in misery.
Jagannath Prabhu, do you want to elaborate?
We don't control our urges, we will end up in the material miseries again.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Do you want to elaborate on that example?
So we don't first, I will give as condition souls, we don't realize that we have disease condition, and we don't follow the prescription of Acharyas properly. So the prescription of Acharya Buddha is to chant 16 rounds for so we come out of diseased state, and we cannot enjoy fully if we are in diseased state. So to follow the prescription.
Jagannath Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
So, Prabhu, actually, somehow or other, we have to engage our senses in the service of Krishna. If you are missing at a point also, at a particular moment also, then we are actually failing. So we don't have to fail at any moment of time, Prabhu, because this is the test we have to go through each and every moment. So you have given the examples of the doctors and patient. So doctor is actually instructing that you, the patient, don't have to eat particular kind of food. But if the patient is not taking care of the instruction of the doctor, then he will be again trapped and he will be again in the danger. So the same way Prabhupada is also instructing us that we have to follow the instruction of Srila Prabhupada. And if any moment of time, if we are deviating from the path of, then will be again in the danger and we have to come back here.
Palni Mataji, do you want to add anything? Mataji, you're on mute.
You were talking about, I've been trying to remember the name of that king you were mentioning, of Narada giving some instructions to a king. I couldn't get the name of that king. If you can please give me which
4.2953, Prachina Bari.
Prachina Bari. I've never heard of that name before, so I'm going to look it up.
Okay.
4.29.53. Okay.
Ankit Soni Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Yeah. The doctor example, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you have mentioned about doctor analogy there, and patient is taking some sort of food which is not at all recommended, but doctor is saying to patient that he should take only liquid diet, so that it will be beneficial for the patient to recover. So same is the situation of ourselves in this material world. We should do whatever our acharyas recommended to us, not the way we want.
So there were a few more important aspects that were mentioned in this, that one cannot enjoy foodstuff in the diseased condition of life. So even though he may try to taste that solid food, which may look interesting or good for him at that moment of time, but actually there is no real happiness in the diseased condition of life. The only way one can actually really happy or become really happy is by coming out of the diseased condition of life. So similarly, the doctor is recommending us to prevent us from few things. Similarly, the urge to, the freedom that we give to not tolerate these urges is also leading us to similar kind of a disease condition of life without really giving us cure. And the cure is possible only by being in the transcendental position of Krishna consciousness. So we should try to come out of this and not enjoy these urges. That is exactly like a deceased man trying to enjoy in a very diseased way without really actually knowing what true happiness is. So, and what does Prabhupada say about why one should control the urges in the purport, first line? Anyone can raise their hands if they know. Sridhar? So one who does not control these urges of senses, one cannot make progress in direction of self-realization. So one who is engaged in materials, engaging in material senses with sense objects, or not checking the forces of desire and anger, then the path of self-realization is not possible for them. So if one wants to go on to the path of self-realization, then controlling these urges is a must. And Prabhupada ends this purport by saying that a transcendentalist, it is the duty of the transcendentalist to try to strenuously to control desire and anger. If one wants to make, one wants to become a transcendentalist, a spiritualist, a yogi, Krishna conscious devotee, one must work very hard. One cannot say that it's my nature, this is how I am, and therefore I'll remain like this. No, one must make one sincere, strenuous. In fact, Prabhupada is saying strenuous. One must try to strenuously to control desire and anger. So this strenuously, extremely working hard to control these different urges is a very important principle for one to become Krishna conscious. And yes. Okay. Srinidhi Mataji, what is the way to control mind's urges?
Is by thinking about Krishna, Prabhu.
There was a little more specific thing that was discussed in the class.
By chanting and thinking more about Krishna.
Chanting and remembering the lotus feet of the Lord. So definitely thinking of Krishna is also included in that. So by chanting and remembering the lotus feet of the Lord. Shri Prabhu, how to control the urges of tongue and belly?
Prabhu, to consume only Krishna Prasadam at scheduled times.
Yeah. To honor, to take Krishna Prasadam at scheduled times. Very good. And how do we check anger? Ankit Soni Prabhu?
Yeah, Prabhu. So only thinking about Krishna and talking about Krishna. That way, our anger will not come.
No, that was not the example that was given.
Hanuman.
Jagannath Tirtha Prabhu?
Sorry, Prabhu, I just missed out, Prabhu.
I said, what is the example? How to control anger, the urge of anger?
I missed out, Prabhu.
Okay, no problem. Palini Mataji?
Apply on those who blaspheme the devotees of the Lord. You gave example of Hanuman.
Yes, yes, yes. So, and anyone remembers which verse was quoted regarding? Okay. Sridhar, how to control the urges of genitals?
Only for procreation.
So, it is very important to train. How to control Vachuvekam? Speaking about Krishna Katha, glories of. So, so Prahlad Maharaj also says, what does Prahlad Maharaj says about one who is uncontrolled in sense activities? Anyone remembers? Can raise their hands. Matirna Krishna.
Swata. Materna Krishna. Parata Svatova.
Yes.
Materna Krishna.
So what does it say?
What word number is that, Prabhu?
No, that line itself is telling what will happen.
Without, yeah.
What is Matirna Krishna?
Without developing attachment for Krishna, Parata Swato, am I saying it right?
Parata Svatova. So basically the inclination, one's mati does not go to Krishna. Because of uncontrolled senses, who is too much addicted to enjoy one's senses, he cannot make progress towards Krishna conscious. He rather makes progress towards hellish conditions of life. And punas charvita charvita.
Chewing the chew.
Sarvananam. So they're only engaged in chewing the chewed. One who is enjoying senses, there is no pleasure in it, but still one is chewing the same thing. And therefore they remain in Vishatam Tamishram. They are just going towards the hellish condition of life. This principle of controlling the urges of senses is a must for one who wants to become Krishna conscious. Otherwise, one cannot become Krishna conscious. How in Vedic times one was trained?
Gravity.
So Grihastha also, but I did not write here. So basically in these 3 ashramas, there is complete abstinence of sex, complete training they receive, especially in brahmacharyas, how to handle different urges. And there are so many rules and regulations that one undergoes under the guidance of a spiritual master to control these urges. And especially in the life of Grihastha, it is very easy to get loose or not control these urges. And yes. What is the meaning of the word ashrama? Anyone can raise their hands.
Ashrama. The various stages of life?
No.
Certain level of sacrifice, bro. Like abstaining from something, following some regulative.
No. Sridhar.
So we go to make spiritual progress. So whatever activity we do, that is towards spiritual.
Yes. 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 Ashrama means where the goal is spiritual goal, is to make advancement in spiritual life. So different ashramas, they are of no use if there is no goal to become progressive in spiritual life. So brahmacharya, someone may say I'm celibate, but that does not make any value unless one is making progress in spiritual life. Similarly, if one is in grihastha, if one does not add this idea of ashrama, where the search for the absolute truth, Prabhupada writes in 1.2.10 purport, that the search for absolute truth, if it is there, then all sorts of problems will vanquish. Prabhupada says the family planning, this planning, so many people are trying to artificially control various problems, all will vanquish. Unwanted fights, everything will vanquish if simply one researches about absolute truth. One tries to understand absolute truth. So ashrama means the center, the family, the husband, wife, children, everyone is trying to assist each other in spiritual progress. Brahmacharya, Vanaprastha, Sannyasa, the only aim is to make progress in spiritual life. Only then there is meaning to it. Otherwise, there is no meaning to ashrama at all. One may claim oneself in different ashramas, but without spiritual progress, it is no more an ashrama. Anyone remembers the difference between need and want?
Yes, Prabhu. Prabhu, the need is means whatever the needed for our life to just spend our life, and the want is for the like I want to get a Mercedes-Benz car. So this is a want. So actually unnecessary. We are just increasing our need. So it's called the
need is what is essential, necessity.
Yes, sir. And the want is unnecessary.
It is not necessary. It's not. What is the right word?
Required.
It is not absolutely necessary.
Yes.
So basically, everyone is caught up in different kinds of wants.
Yes.
And therefore, one gets diverted to different kinds of things and loses attention from the goal of life, from the focus of spiritual life. So this clear distinction should be there. Is this an unwanted want? So the difference between artha and anartha. Anartha means which is unwanted. Artha means wanted. So we must make choices in our mind. Is this required for spiritual life? Is this beneficial for the service of Guru and Krishna? Then I accept. If it is not, I do not accept. So if one can make this simple formula to make choices, then one can simplify one's life so much. Along with depending upon Krishna and Guru, if one simply follows a simple principle, then a lot of complexities in life can vanquish. Otherwise, the wants will eat away us. Okay.
There was one verse which was quoted from the nectar of, not from the nectar of instruction, while telling that verse from Narada Muni's instruction to Prachina Barisa from Bhagavatam. Anybody remembers? 11:9:29. Labdhva Sudurlabham.
It was there in the purport itself, no?
Yeah, it's a very beautiful verse. Does anybody remember what is the meaning of that verse? Any essence from that verse? Anybody can tell, will get some bonus marks. Out of this question answer so far, whatever has happened, mostly you are just above pass. Distinction has not yet come. He was about to finish. I said, no, let's do this question answer and see how attentive we are. Actually, it's a good way of remembering. There is no other reason for asking these questions. Otherwise, the whole verse class will be over and then again we don't remember anything.
11 point?
9.29. देखने के बाद मार्क्स आधा कम हो जाता है.
Okay, bro.
Anybody without seeing wants to try? The man from Qutub Minar. Jagannath, where are you? Your background is some Delhi Qutub Minar or something.
I just came to the temple and so many people are engaged in some different activities. So I just came.
Okay, no problem. Can you tell me what is the meaning of that verse? Any one essence from that verse? Srinidhi Mataji, if you are there. Okay, Sridhar. Checking marks gone.
Not even I can say now, bro.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah, no, so, go ahead.
Okay, Srinidhi Mataji, let's hear from you first.
So, Prabhu, one thing that I can remember is sober birth after many births.
Many births is a very important one.
Rare form of human.
It's a rare form of life. Anityam adhruvam, labdhva sudurlabham, bahusambhavante. Manusyam janmam idam, arthadham apiha dhira. Something like that verse is. Turnam yateta napatet.
Anumrityu yavan.
So having gotten this human form of life, which is extremely rare, after having gotten it many lifetimes, bahusambhavante. Now, if we don't Turna Mateta, immediately we should take up to this Krishna consciousness. Till the time our breath is there. Anumrityu. Till the time of. Otherwise, we don't know how much time we have. And taking it lightly is stupidity. Okay, nectar of instruction, while he was putting those six urges, he mentioned one acharya, which is quoted by Prabhupada in the purport also. That acharya says that for this urge you should do this, for this urge you should do this. And of all the urges, this is the most difficult to control. Which acharya? Good time. My 29. Fail. Acharya at least is. Yes, Jagannath Prabhu. Shrey.
Rupa Goswami Prabhu.
Hey. Here, Sridhar just told, and I told him 29 out of 100, so it's gone. Just because Acharya and the Rupa Goswami is an Acharya, so you got 29, otherwise 0. Ankit?
Sorry, Prabhu, don't remember.
Yes. Okay. Oh, you got the question. So actually, if you see the nectar of instruction, the entire nectar of instruction, at least the first part of nectar of instruction, there are only 11 verses in that. Prabhupada gives his commentary, then he quotes all Siddhanta Saraswati. Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati who says, and then that Anubhasya commentary of Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur is quoted by Prabhupada. All the senses, the difficult to control is the one that we chant every day before honoring Prasadam, written by Bhakti Vinod Thakur.
Sorry, you got cut off. Can you please repeat that once again?
Hare Krishna. Disconnected from my phone, from my mobile laptop. Sorry. So it is Bhakti Vinod Thakur. Okay, I think enough for today. But the more we do this, actually, the more chances are there. I would not say 100% we will remember, but the more the chances we'll remember. So Saknoti Yeheva Yeshodum Prak Sarira Vimokshanat Kama Krodhot Bhavam Begam Sayeva Sukhinara. What is the last line? Sayukta Sukhinara. So Saknoti Iheva Yeshodum. So this verse also, if you think in your mind only, then you will be able to remember. I'm not seeing the verse, I'm just telling from my memory. Of course, this is a very wonderful verse. Sukhinara. One person can become happy. How? Two things. Saknoti Iheva Yeshodum Prak Sarira Vimokshana. Before quitting this body, without further delay, we don't know. We can't wait till eternity. Saknoti Iheva Yeshodum, who can control the urges. Urges, which are those urges? 6 urges. Vacho Vegam, Manasa Krodha Vegam, Jivha Vegam, Udara Upastha Vegam. Etan Vegan Yo Vishaheta Dhiram. Prithvim Sasitya. Pura line bola hai. Anyway, so the 6 urges, if one can control before quitting the body. And Kama Krodhot Bhavam Vegam. Kama Krodhot Bhavam Vegam, there is one more word there. Ayukta, so third line, can you see? What is the third line of this verse, Mataji? Krodhot Bhavam Begam. Okay, wahi hai. Sayukta sa Sukhinara. So the second part of this verse is, before giving up this present body, if one is able to tolerate the urges of the material senses and check the force of desire and anger. So 2 things, desire and anger, are very specifically mentioned. He is well situated, sa yukta, and he is happy in this world. So that is the verse for today. Over to you, Pandra.
for joining. So before we end, Granthara Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki,
Jai.
Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki,
Jai.
Jai Gaur Premanande.
Hari.
Hari Hari Bol.
Can I ask everyone to come in front of camera once? Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare,
Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare,
Hare Rama, Hare Rama,
Hare Rama, Hare Rama,
Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna Prabhupada ki,
Jai.
Gaur Premanande.
Hari Hari Bol.
Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Hare.
Hare Krishna. How are you?
Hare Krishna.
What is your name?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. How is Paridhi? The
Yeah.
elder daughter?
Yeah, she's doing good, Prabhuji.
Okay. And her name is Ikshya?
Iksha.
Yeah, Iksha. Okay, good. Very nice. She is also hearing the class?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she's also hearing.
So you can train her from now that the questions will come later on.
Definitely, Prabhuji.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.